Thanks for listening to this podcast of Trending with Timmerie. If you haven't already subscribed, please catch us wherever you love to listen to your podcast, from the Relevant Radio app to Apple, YouTube, you name it, we are there. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, please be sure to go and give us a 5-star review to help other people discover the podcast. Anything you share in terms of episodes, whether it's texting it to a friend, posting on social media, helps to build up the kingdom for God, to help confront the challenging issues we face as a culture, but with joy, with hope, and with an eternal perspective where our faith collides with everyday life, bringing eternal principles to help us live our life joyfully.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio.
How on earth do we work toward healing division in our society when people seem so polarized? We'll discuss this today with Father Nathan Cromly. Also, how then do you have a conversation with people who disagree with you? Stay tuned. We're going to get there in just a moment. The reality is sometimes I feel like we just don't have a conversation. The opportunity to have a conversation often isn't there. So maybe we'll even talk about finding the means of conversation or acknowledging sometimes those opportunities just don't arise. So what do we do? In light of the 49th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, we're going to talk about the changing battlegrounds and the pro-life movement, a call to action, and some incredible news that isn't news, but it's good news. That is, the latest Marist poll sees that 71% of Americans want major limits on abortion. That, my friend, tells you that 7 out of 10 Americans want abortion to be limited legally, that in the vast majority of cases, people are actually pro-life, even though they're making excuses for early abortion. What does that mean? That there is incredible opportunity for the conversion of hearts and minds, votes for pro-life candidates, votes for pro-life laws. So we have a lot ahead of us. So stay tuned as we dive into the changing battlegrounds and the pro-life movement and the hope that is in our future. The future is pro-life. Now, as we talk about this, because it's very important to see changing kind of directions for just a moment, I'm going to talk on Thursday about a very important topic, and this has to do with wombs for rent. That's right. You may be aware of what I'm talking about. That is specifically this trend we've seen in the culture surrounding surrogacy. You know, some people just think that it's the elite, that it's people who are wealthy who are using a surrogate, that is someone to carry their child. Perhaps they use in vitro fertilization in the process. Well, the Jonas Brothers are doing it. Many others are doing it. But did you know that even a feminist writer is now slamming surrogacy, talking about ready-made babies? We're going to talk about this because I think it's important. It's not just celebrities who are going through with surrogacy. It's actually a lot of people who want a baby, may or may not be able to carry on their own, or maybe don't want their bodies to be impacted. And they're actually, and I know people who have done this, they're going into debt in order to have babies in this way. Is it pro-life? It's not. Is it healthy for women? It's not. So stay tuned. We're going to talk about that this Thursday, but I want to kind of, tease this topic for you to hear because people are talking about it in light of the Jonas Brothers now doing it. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie. Let's talk about how to work toward healing division in our society and finding ways to have conversations with those people who disagree with us. Joining me now is Father Nathan Cromly, a good friend and a mentor. He is the founder and president of Eagle Eye Ministries, as well as the St. John Leadership Institute. You can find them at eagleeyeministries.org. And he's joining me today to talk about how we can work toward healing division in our society. Father Nathan, welcome to Trending.
I'm so happy to be with you, Timmerie.
Thank you for taking the time. Let's talk about the polarizing culture we live in. It's so bad that even family who we've known and loved for years are no longer inviting us or us inviting them to various events, whether it's disagreements over masks, vaccines, abortion, politics, religion. Perhaps many of us have never seen such a polarized nation when we would have thought at a time of such crisis over the last couple of years, we would have seen a greater union between people. So how do we work toward healing this division?
I think the very first thing is to recognize that this is actually a moment of opportunity for us. I think a lot of the discourse focuses on a type of despair or complaining about this situation, when actually this is why Christ calls us as Christians. And if we step into the situation instead of running away from it, this is an awesome moment for us to let the love of Christ and his unity that he calls for actually shine. And I think that if we take an aggressive stance, in a positive way, an assertive stance in this situation, we can actually bring peace, which is what we're called to do, instead of just augmenting by our complaints or our despair about these discrepancies that exist. So I
You know,
think
some
we need to first change our mindset to be,
mm,
how
mhm.
can I bring peace, instead of complaining about it.
Father Nathan, something you just said actually reminded me that this can actually be fun. We talk so often about, the best conversations aren't about people, but ideas. It's an opportunity, whether you agree with someone or disagree with someone, to actually hear what another person really thinks by challenging them, not by, putting them on the spot, by asking them questions, legitimately getting into the heart and mind of where other people are thinking. It can actually be really fascinating. We spend all this time on the internet learning about things that really don't matter most of the time, and niche ideas, but we can actually learn about the incredible dimension of the human psyche and other people, whether we agree with them or disagree with them. So you're reminding me, in the midst of what you're saying is an opportunity to step forward, it can actually be a joyful engagement and fun.
Absolutely. And to even build on that, most of the time, unfortunately, Timmerie, I think a lot of us, we just respond back with the other side of the argument that we've listened to on the news or
Mm-hmm.
that we don't really own. And if we actually push the person speaking to think through the situation for themselves, we'll find a lot of common ground. What the worst thing we can do is to fall into the case of just repeating back the same talking points that they're repeating to us from their side.
Mm. It's very true, which is a reminder of listening. Like actually listening. That's so important. And it's something that we seem to fail at today. You see those bumper stickers about tolerance, but yet we don't even have tolerance in the respect that even if someone else is speaking, we tend to zone out, think about all the other things we have to do or the response we have before ever even hearing their argument.
That's right. And by listening, we also find a pathway forward. And I almost would say the big theme on this is to not go in it repeating other people's thoughts, but to try to find the person who's actually presenting to you. So when someone brings
Mm.
the most crazy ideas forward in a militant fashion, usually there's a person behind there. And if we can manage to touch their heart and their inner motivation for why they're saying those things, or why they think that those things are important, we find a pathway where we actually meet them, because most of the time we agree on why it's important. We just don't agree on the way to apply it.
Mm, isn't that true? And what you're saying is so important for us to remember, because we tend to think that we're in a war, and we are. We really are. We're in a war over ideas. We're in a war over truth. We're in a war for souls. But what you're talking about is the importance of seeing the individual in the midst of the conversation, the battle we're in. We're not about winning wars, we're about winning hearts and minds. And so that's where telling the truth to the specific person we're speaking to is so important.
And it's such a positive thing. I think a lot of times, especially younger people, tend to see truth as something that's negative or aggressive, and actually truth is liberating and peace giving. And that's the perspective. We are at war. I agree with you, Timmerie, but we're at war for the person that we're talking to,
Not
and
against
not
them.
against the person that we're
Hmm.
talking to. And when we
Amen.
look at it that way, our dialogue, the real secret is that we have got to own what we say, and we've got to be put our own intelligence behind our words, and not just repeat what we've heard or what we've read from people who are motivated to win numbers of people to their cause. That's not the position of a Christian. As a Christian, I'm not
Mm.
here to win numbers of people to my cause. I'm here to help liberate each individual person to give and to become who they are by the encounter with Christ through me. It's a very different perspective. Truth sets free. It doesn't make numbers of people following causes.
Mm. That is, I think, a profound statement to remember because it equips people who maybe feel like they don't have all of the facts, they don't know all of the information. They might live by a certain ideology, a theology, they might have a take on something, but they might think, well, I'm not completely informed, so I don't have the right to say anything. But the reality is that we need to stop being afraid of both our own position that we hold, even if it's perhaps not fully informed, or other people's positions, because a lot of people are in the same boat. They might hold to something very firmly, but not maybe be able to articulate it as well.
And when I can touch the question that's behind the person I'm talking to, we get to have a divine encounter. What I mean by that is there's a sacredness of when a human being meets another human being in depth. And I think our society is longing for it, Timmerie. I think that that's one of the reasons why people keep throwing ideas around and sometimes taking positions that are just hurtful against us and excluding us from conversations or from visiting or those things that you mentioned. Deep down inside is because we're longing for real, genuine contact with other people. And that's where the Christian needs to step forth and have the courage to ask questions, to take the dialogue to another level, to go beyond the talking points that they're throwing out at us and to touch the heart. Why are you saying those things? Why do you care that much about the position? What are you looking for? And when we can have a genuine encounter between two people, that it soothes and heals our souls and theirs. And it's actually the beginning of the healing of our entire society.
Some years ago, I engaged in a debate with the feminist professor at Cal State San Marcos in San Diego. And this was a woman who held to a radically pro abortion position, was not a friend of the church and the church's ideas. And she invited her whole school, all of her students there at the school. We had hundreds of people show up. And I remember as we were debating, something came up in her arguments, and it was that she herself had faced an unplanned pregnancy. She had a little boy from that, and she couldn't imagine not having had her child. And it was such a testimony to the pro-life position. Now, when it came for the opportunity to, kind of cross-examine one another, I threw my hands up. I thought, I'm not going to, try and cross-examine. I looked at her and I said, can you tell me about your unplanned pregnancy and your son? And her body language, her experience, she literally shared her pro-life testimony, even though she holds to a pro-abortion stance. That did more than I could do. I saw her. I had a conversation with her. People there who knew her and loved her were willing then able to listen to an incredibly pro-life story. And I thought it was such a powerful moment because it was a reminder for me of the importance of not trying to win an argument, not trying to look fantastic myself and give the best argument in front of this radically pro-abortion group of people, but to see where they will most be able to hear the truth and how this woman herself will see she's living the truth already.
And although we have to accept that, in fact, sometimes we're going to lose because the other side is just trying to crush with ideas. And that's what's hard. Sometimes you can try to take the high road. You can try to engage deeply. You can open yourselves up for those beautiful moments like what you described. And I just want to let everyone know it's maybe okay if it doesn't happen, because sometimes we think because there's a witness that we can also give to the authenticity of the intelligence, to go beyond polemics and to look for what is authentically true in both positions and to water and fertilize that truth to grow into full fruition. It's a longer work. It's a harder work, but it's the work that our Lord engaged in. You don't see our Lord throwing out sound bites, at people. You see him talking in parables, teaching, spending time with developing his arguments with those. And sometimes there's a direct clash. He doesn't hesitate to clash, to say things as it is, but he's always aiming at a truth that's bigger than a position, a truth that sets hearts free because it invites them to encounter and to give the deeper part of who they are forth. And so I guess my point is this, that it is beautiful as what you described is a lot of times people try that and then it doesn't work and they get frustrated. And I just want to encourage everybody.
Yes.
It's not because it works. It's because everything that we do needs to have that intentionality to say, I'm here to do the work of God and to bring you up. And sometimes you don't want to come up. Well, I still did my job and I'm waiting for you to do yours.
And that can be crushing at times. You think, I worked so hard. Maybe it's on a sibling. Maybe it's on a friend. Maybe it's on a coworker. And you think you're seeing absolutely no progress. We have all been there. We are all there, probably even today. And so that's why we're going to come back and we're going to discuss how to have conversations with people who disagree with you. And I think that this is where I also want to touch on the importance of planting seeds. We may not see a change today. We may not see anything for a number of years to come, but we can see by the impact we had on people how maybe one day a coin will drop for them and they will always remember the example you set or a seed that was planted with them that otherwise wouldn't have been there if you hadn't had an encounter with them. So we'll be right back here on Trending with Timmerie with Father Nathan Cromly. Again, he's the president and founder of Eagle Eye Ministries. You can find him and his work as well as the St. John Leadership Institute at eagleeyeministries.org. That's eagleeyeministries.org. The link will be in the podcast notes for today's show as well. And if you can't stay with us for the full episode, catch a podcast tonight at relevantradio.com/trending or wherever you catch your podcasts. Programming brought to you by Solidarity Health Share. The new Solidarity One program offers expedited sharing of medical bills for even faster service, expanded senior discounts, pharmacy sharing, and greater flexibility to fit any healthcare budget. Learn more at CatholicHealthShare.com.
Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
As we experience a year of St. Joseph in 2021, this year we're doing something very special by spending a year celebrating Our Lady with miracles, mysteries, and Mary. We're exploring Mary's intercession in human history and in our lives every day. Grow in faith, knowledge, and devotion through these lessons from Our Lady. Miracle, Mysteries, and Mary. It's free to receive email series and gain access to exclusive content. Sign up today at relevantradio.com/Mary. That's relevantradio.com/Mary. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. Today is my dear friend and mentor, Father Nathan Cromly. He's the founder and president of Eagle Eye Ministries, which works to form young minds and hearts in the call to evangelization, as well as the St. John Leadership Network and Institute. You can find them at eagleeyeministries.org. We're talking about the polarizing society we live in, how to overcome that polarization, and we're turning to how to actually have conversations with people who disagree with you. Now, Father Nathan, to kick off this part of the conversation, I do think this is an interesting topic because we so often talk about having conversations, but the majority of the time, we don't actually have conversations with those people we're disagreeing with, which I think is fascinating because we're always saying, have a conversation.
It's true. But I think that speaks to something we can still do, because although you're right, if we can all wish we could sit down for 3 hours and, sit there and talk about deep things. But in fact, most of the time it's texts or Facebook messages or Instagram things. And I think what I'd invite everyone to do is, am I actually moving towards God? Meaning, is my life leading in a direction where other people can follow? Or am I just playing reactive constantly to everyone else's situation? And I think the more that we're proactive about our lives and take a direction and say, I'm moving towards God in a joyful and wonderful way, the more often that those conversations that we have or the Facebook messages we send or the ways that we interact with people can invite other people into something wonderful, instead of us simply trying to, one way or the other, make a critical point about what they're living.
That reminder to live joyfully. That's why we have a whole happy hour every single week about being happier and ultimately finding that virtue of joy in our life. That brings us to kind of some of the practical elements. We were talking earlier a lot about the importance of listening and seeing the individual before us, and that in the face of the polarization we may see in society, it's an opportunity for us as Christians, as you said, to step forward and also to have fun. Let's talk about the role of planting seeds in the conversations, encounters, and influence we have with other people.
When we look at the life of our Lord, who's of course our model and exemplar, even in evangelization, he adjusted his speech to the audience. And instead of saying everything that he knows, He looked at where he could help them to take a step forward. And I think that that's a model. He did a lot of seed planting when you look at Jesus. He progressively revealed the truth deeper and deeper, even to his apostles who were living with him. And our job is to never be neutral, but to adjust at the same time to the person who's in front of us and try to help them to at least take a step forward in the right direction. And sometimes that might mean, yeah, we can't say it all, and that's okay. The trick is, did I help my listener to know better the beautiful life that they can have, or did I leave them in the darkness?
Mm. You remind me of the example of Christ too. Here he is, he forms and shapes his apostles during his public ministry. He develops these profound relationships, and in the end, one utterly betrays him, 10 abandon him in his agony and death, and only one stand at the foot of the cross with the Blessed Virgin Mary. And so it reminds me of the importance of planting seeds and how even in the midst of failures of other people to maybe, they're having this conversion and they slip and they fall and they abandon us. Maybe they hide from us. Maybe they're embarrassed, whatever it might be. We still have to be willing, just like Christ. This is the resurrection in our own lives, is that the power of Christ can work in us, even in the face of our disappointments, our own failures of others, that we can still reach out and build that relationship just like Christ did in the resurrection.
And Timmerie, this is the great good news that we have. And I really hope this message can come into the hearts of everyone listening to our conversation. And that's that we have nothing to be ashamed when it comes to our faith. Our faith is a positive message that is true and rings true. And what we need to do is, maybe instead of thinking that we have to constantly defend and constantly, respond in a way that can be acceptable to the crowd around us, if we invite people into this wonderful truth of eternal life, the dignity of the soul coming directly from God, knowing Jesus Christ and salvation, even the ability of the forgiveness of sins, what an incredible message that is for our world. We can let go of the baggage. We can find unity. It's about spinning the conversation around from one of, we are defending the moral laws that you should be following, into a, hey, we have found the fullness of life. We have found the Messiah. We know God, and we want to invite you by sharing our joy with you. That's what I mean by being assertive. It actually then becomes a proposition that's almost, you can't refuse it. It's so attractive. We're inviting people into a way of life. It's not a way of death. But it begins with us inside of our hearts becoming proud of it and accepting that I love this way of life myself. I don't need to be ashamed of it or to find somehow or other another justification beyond the death and resurrection of my Savior for me.
That's Father Nathan Cromly, the founder and president of Eagle Eye Ministries. You can find his incredible work at eagleeyeministries.org, especially the challenge and call for business professionals, for young adults, to dive deeper into their faith, to be leaders, to be in the business world and be a person of faith. So please check out their work at eagleeyeministries.org, where you can link to his other organizations as well. As we continue our conversation, Father Nathan, about how to have conversations with people who disagree with us, let's talk about the importance of trying to speak the other person's language. As people of faith, we tend to use terminology that doesn't always quite match up with what the other person means. We might be saying the same word but have totally different meanings. But also, other people have different perspectives. Many young women today have a very radical feminist perspective, and so we have to be able to take our narrative and speak truth into the ideals they have, but then helping them to get to the truth of what those ideals ultimately are reaching for, which is usually what they're struggling with. So can you talk about examples such as that, where we have to speak the language of the other people while still maintaining our Christian identity and truth?
It's a real beautiful opportunity, Timmerie, and I'm really glad you bring it up because it already demonstrates courage. But I think that's what's so neat about so many of our young people, is that you guys have courage. The older people, we're kind of like, we're all fighting all the time. And the younger people, you're like, well, let's see if we can't meet them where they're at. The meeting point that's fruitful for true dialogue is when you speak about motivation. So don't get stuck in conflictual language or conflictual ideas all the time. The motivation behind every human heart is where they're open for God and they're looking for an answer. Why is this person engaged in what they're doing? And so that's a very practical thing. When you find yourself suddenly confronted by ideas or people who are opposing you, opposing Christ and the gospel, ask them why. Ask them what they're looking for. What are they trying to achieve? And when they give you the first answer, ask them why again. Ask them why again. You're going to come down to a meeting point where actually their why and your why are probably very similar. And once you get to that level and that depth of the dialogue, you can propose to them that there's another way to achieve that why. And that other way is Jesus. You see? And so in a sense, they're trying to achieve radical feminism, for example, and which has all kinds of horrific consequences. Well, that's their choice. They're choosing the wrong way. But what's motivating them is probably the same thing that's motivating you. And if we can touch there, then proposing a different way, a better way to achieve the goal can actually be a real source of dialogue for both of us.
This comes back to even the theme of our weekly happy hour every Monday here on Trending, how if we really understand even good people, bad people, okay people, that including ourselves, the sinners, that we're always motivated in our good decisions and even in our bad decisions with regard to what we believe, what we perceive will make us happy. And so this is, I think, important when you're talking about, looking at the ideals other people have. We have to see their motivation ultimately is happiness. They just are struggling to get there, whether it's, the breakdown in the family they themselves grow up in, various wounds, the people they're being influenced by, the struggles they themselves may have. This brings back the whole idea yet again, Father Nathan, is to have a conversation with other people we disagree with. It requires seeing the individual we're speaking to.
And that means, concretely for us, the courage to be confident in ourselves and at peace in ourselves, because we're going to enter into conflict. And so if we have to begin from a position that says, I am okay being me. And I really want to encourage, especially our younger audience, because sometimes we think I'm not okay being me. Actually, I think I should be like that. I need to be accepted. I think I need to have the opinions of the crowd behind me. Hey, look, that's where your holiness comes in. It's Jesus Christ who's our rock and our light. And if we really have that relationship with him, then I can be so much at peace with myself that I don't have to fight and reach and try to really look at my conversations more as an opportunity for me to encounter and invite than when to be sure of myself. Get your heart grounded firmly in the Lord and in prayer and in joy so that you can bring other people where you are. That's what I mean by leading. We're sometimes chasing after them and they're actually leading the conversation into their negativity. I don't need that. No, we want to lead the conversation by our positivity, and it begins by our spirituality, our faith, and the peace of our hearts in who we are.
Father Nathan, you talked about the importance of learning to be courageous, that is, to be confident in yourself and comfortable with yourself. What do you think gets in the way of that, and how do we break through it?
I would say two things get in the way. First of all, the first thing that gets in the way is that we are looking for affirmation from a world that we're supposed to be affirming instead. Like our job is to lead the world, to guide those around us, to bring them to light. But sometimes we want to fit in, and so we're chasing after their opinions. That's why we lack confidence in ourselves. And the second thing, honestly, Timmerie, I think that a lot of times we think that we can find a substitute for Jesus in something else. We're not standing on the rock. We're not in his truth. And therefore we don't have his peace. So the way to overcome it is this great understanding that having God in our hearts and really living our faith in prayer actually is the most practical thing that there is. When we have God in our hearts, he gives us our identity and peace with ourselves. And that's the most important thing. Don't think, you guys, you can substitute your spirituality for anything. The person who lives in God, and the deeper you go with God, the broader your arms can stretch into this world.
That's Father Nathan Cromly here on Trending with Timmerie. You can find him and his work at eagleeyeministries.org. Again, that's eagleeyeministries.org. Father Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. We've tagged him and his organization on Instagram, and we'll include a link in the podcast notes for today's show at relevantradio.com/trending. We're going to come back talking about the change of battlegrounds in the pro-life movement, and a reminder that the future is pro-life. Today's programming is brought to you by Colby Academy. Offering a customized Catholic curriculum, Colby Academy knows the ultimate goal of education is to help our children be saints. More info at relevantradio.com/Colby.
So, what's trending? Bridging your Catholic faith with your everyday life. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie on Relevant Radio and the Relevant Radio app.
In light of the growing tension between Russia and Ukraine, the Holy Father, Pope Francis, has called for a day of prayer for peace this Wednesday, January 26th. So please join us tomorrow here at Relevant Radio. Let's respond to the Holy Father's call and pray for peace together, especially during the daily Mass at noon Central, the Chaplet of Divine Mercy at 3 p.m. Central on the Drew Mariani Show, and the Family Rosary across America at 7 p.m. Central this Wednesday. I hope you will join us this weekend and the last couple of weeks. Not just thousands, not just tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of people have marched across the nation. Whether 150,000 in the March for Life in Washington, D.C., whether it be 20,000 in San Francisco, whether it be thousands in San Diego, in Los Angeles, in Cincinnati, in Texas, hundreds upon thousands of people have stood up, have spoken, have prayed, and said, I am pro-life. Even in the face of lockdowns and restrictions, people have still come out in droves. Think about for all the people who have stood, many people who at home, for whatever reason, are not able to join in person, are saying, we are pro-life. We believe that life is worth living, worth respecting. From the moment of conception, that we believe in helping women, we love them both, and we understand that equality itself begins in the womb. This is a reminder. This is why I appreciate this memorial of the march, although it's so sorrowful that we are almost at 50 years of legalized abortion through the Supreme Court decision of Roe versus Wade and Doe versus Bolton. It's sad. It's a sad day. It's a day to pray, to ponder the lives lost, the women, the men, and the families who have been impacted. To beg mercy from God. But it's a day to say we will stand and we will continue to stand until abortion ends in our nation. And I really do believe that we will see Roe versus Wade overturned this summer. If we don't, I believe we will still have good results in terms of being able to further limit access to abortion across the nation. But this is the challenge ahead of us. We have marching orders. And just as marchers in Washington, D.C. were told, it's time to march, it's time to take your orders. Right now, we need to pray and fast for our Supreme Court justices. We need to pray and fast even for our Catholic president who is not standing by pro-life Catholic principles. In fact, his statement yesterday, we'll come to that actually in just a moment, he released a statement with Vice President Kamala Harris, and it was just an absolute travesty to hear what they said. But it's a reminder of how much we have to do to pray and fast for elected officials, judges, and also those who are involved in this pro-life work. We need to mobilize. We need to be ready to go. We need to say, what part can I play in the ending of abortion, in saving one life at a time, in changing the hearts and minds of others? I think there's a lot of really fantastic news. We've known for years that the majority of Americans are pro-life, but right on the eve of this weekend's anniversary of Roe versus Wade, a new Marist poll was actually released that showed more than 7 in 10 Americans want major limits to be placed on abortion. Did you know that? 7 in 10 Americans want major limits to be placed on abortion. This is huge because I think so often people believe that they're alone and they're the only people who are pro-life and all their friends, all their family hold to a different idea. Perhaps that might be your case in the group of people that you are around. But the reality is, and this is important, we need to mark this and remember it, that 7 in 10 Americans want major limits to be placed on abortion today. They want to see that change. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't think that this is only partisan. This receives bipartisan approval. 70% of independent voters want to see major restrictions placed on abortion, and nearly 50%, that's 1 in 2 Democrats believe that there should be major restrictions placed on abortion. But you wouldn't know this because the mainstream media is not telling the truth. Those who are loudest in the feminist pro-abortion movement are the ones saying, well, this is what we need in order to be equal. This is what we need to be a developed nation. They convinced poor Ireland a couple years ago, an incredibly pro-life nation, to suddenly insist upon having abortion. It's just because people spoke loudly enough to tell them that if they didn't have access to abortion, they were less than. And this is why we need to tell another story. We need to take this opportunity and remember the majority of people are either pro-life or pro-life in the majority of instances. They're not being given the information. They're not informed enough in order to make the right voting decisions, to have the right conversations. So you and I have a responsibility to help change hearts and minds. Whether the battlegrounds change this coming June and we suddenly find ourselves only facing the future of abortion in our individual states as we vote state to state, we decide what those restrictions will or will not be, or whether we continue to see legalized abortion across the nation, we have to rally voters. We have to change hearts and minds. We have to inform people, and we have to help especially women in crisis pregnancies. We'll come to more things we can do in just a moment. But it's important that when looking at the recent study that came out, the recent Marist polling, what we also saw is that over 50% of Americans oppose tax dollars going to pay for abortions. In other words, if 1 out of 2 people believe that tax money should not pay for abortion, what does this say? Well, we can actually work on defunding Planned Parenthood and other abortion clinics, the greater abortion movement. Now, even more so, 7 out of 10 people oppose funding abortion for other countries. That's an even greater majority. Why is it that if the majority of Americans do not want to fund abortion not only in our country but abroad, why is it that we are involved in the United Nations Population Fund that is not only supplying abortions for people in other nations, but it's pressuring communities to adopt abortion when cultures believe that life is worth protecting, life is worth living? You see, the United States Population Fund, funded by the United States and other developed nations, they're going into cultures that are inherently pro-life and forcing abortion upon them. And so this is why it's very important for us to see and understand the importance of standing for life in our culture today. So as we talk about this, remember that not only do people, 1, vast majority believe in major restrictions on abortion. 2, they also believe that our tax money, our hard-earned money, should not go to pay for abortions here in the United States or abroad. But 3rd, and this is where we're seeing a challenge right now in terms of keeping people from having an abortion. You see, with the COVID pandemic that we faced, we've seen that our current administration, the president has actually determined, President Joe Biden has determined that he was going to deregulate the harmful and damaging RU486 chemical abortion pill. That is a set of 2 pills that a woman takes to start the abortion process. She can do it at home. She receives the shock of giving birth to a dead baby, rather small, but yet still distinguishable. She can see. That's why the abortion clinics tell these women flush, don't look when they pass their baby. This is the reality. When polled in this Marist poll, Americans oppose Over 60%, 6 in 10 Americans oppose mail order abortion. That is the deregulation of abortion that has been harmful for women. We've seen an uptick in emergency room visits due to failed and improperly functioning and approached abortion. We've seen this in Europe as well, where they've also deregulated the abortion pill. We've seen thousands upon thousands of women who are experiencing botched abortions, profuse bleeding, and much more. And so this is why we must stand and remember that our nation is pro-life. The majority of people are pro-life. Praise God, you are not alone. So we must mobilize. We must convert these pro-life positions of the majority of America to votes. We must educate them so that they become fully pro-life in all instances. And we have to help women and men today, especially young people who are living in a culture that is pro-abortion, who are living a pro-abortion lifestyle that is because they don't understand the value of saving sex for marriage. They don't understand that contraception is not only a means of preventing children, but it's bad for your body. And that in a number of cases, people still end up pregnant, which is why we see the necessity of the fail-safe of abortion. Because if you live that lifestyle, if you believe that sex doesn't have the consequence, in other words, the gift of a child, if you believe that sex can be engaged in outside of marriage, well, that's where we still have, even if a culture is pro-life in the majority, they're dependent upon abortion. And so we need to help change the hearts and minds of our friends, our family. Do you know someone who's maybe living with their boyfriend or girlfriend? Are you willing to talk to them about it? Seeing the individual with love and kindness, telling the truth and the impact. Maybe you know someone who's on hormonal contraception. Maybe you know someone who's abortion vulnerable given the state in their life. We have to be prepared to change hearts and minds in our lives with the conversations we have. This is why today on the show we talked about the importance of having conversation and making a change in a culture that is so divided. You're listening to Trending with Timmerie here on Relevant Radio. We have a question coming in having to do with seeking advice. It's Ephraim in New York. Ephraim, what's your question for us today on Trending?
Yes. How do you pronounce your name? Timmerie?
Timmerie, that's it.
Yes. I actually saw you years ago at the March for Life, and I was always curious. You were always looking at the March for Life Educational and Defense Fund table, and I always wondered who you were until now I hear you over the radio, and I'm just surprised that you are so exact with these statistics. They differ from the statistics that many of our governors, like in Texas and in Alabama, where they passed anti-abortion legislation, they don't actually explain many of the factors or issues involving abortion and the consequences that come from that type of belief. I'm not guilty of the act, but my father was a man that was very guilty of that. He believed in a form of abortion that was contrary to church teaching, that he said it was involved the divinical viewpoints of Christ, and he died this past year. But nevertheless, I did prayed for him, prayed for his soul, because I knew that maybe because he always said he was going to Mass every Sunday, and he asked for God's forgiveness for all the things he did in his life, but he never understood why he believed in that form and type of divinical abortion. And I believe that many people should listen to you and should listen to people who are knowledgeable of the belief of anti-abortion. Because if they don't listen, it's always going to be that they're going to be listening to someone else that will give them more understanding.
Ephraim, I'd love to hear. If you have a question, we'd be happy to take it. Thank you so much for your pro-life stance and for sharing about your father. Do you have a question today for us on Trending?
Yes, ma'am. My question is this. Is it advisable to listen to the advice that your pastor gives you in regards to marriage and chastity? Or is it better to listen to other viewpoints that come from a secularized understanding of marriage and chastity?
Well, of course, this is a great question, Ephraim. If you're turning to your pastor for marital advice, it's important that, of course, the pastor is teaching and encouraging what the church teaches about marital chastity, whether it be having to do with everything from pornography and the impact of pornography, staying faithful to your spouse, and physical act as well. All of this. So I think that your question is very important. We're always called as Catholics to follow, honor, and respect the Catholic Church's teaching on marital chastity and the call of spouses to be faithful, to be freely giving ourselves, to be fruitful, and to totally give ourselves in marriage. And so, of course, if your pastor is standing in line with church teaching, that's very, very important that we too are standing there. But there's nothing wrong with also looking at the great impact that the social sciences have with regard to marriage and family life. In fact, our faith is so human-centered, and faith and reason, the social sciences, they really do match up. This is why, of course, you want to look at good studies and have good, sound psychological advice, but there's no reason why our faith doesn't have to be compatible, can't be compatible, that is, with the truth that is shared in many psychological studies today. Just unfortunately, because we live in a very radically feminist, pro-abortion culture, often those truths are hidden or manipulated. And so I do hope you are encouraged to, really make sure you're always discerning and knowing what the church teaches so that you're also not led astray. Because sometimes, yes, we as Catholics can fail at teaching what the church teaches. And this brings up a really good point, Ephraim, because it's a reminder that we do struggle sometimes, that sometimes, people we turn to as leaders in the Catholic faith, that they don't always actually teach what the church teaches. This reminds me even of my own experience with Engaged Encounter and the pre-Cana retreats and all those, formative moments we have before you get married, when you have, all these retreats and things that are required of you in order to get married in the Catholic Church, or things that are supposed to bring you closer together as a couple in your faith and look at all the practical dimensions of interpersonal relationships. However, in my experience, unfortunately, what the church teaches was not being taught by Catholics in these pre-Cana courses. Now, I'm not saying that all pre-Cana courses are bad, but what I'm saying is sometimes we have wolves in sheep's clothing, that even our own church can fail upholding what the church teaches. But this is the power of the truth of the Catholic Church. It stands true. We can look back and say, well, what does the church teach on this? What does the church teach on that? And we can come with certainty to know through the education, whether it be through the Catechism of the Catholic Church, vetted and compared and set side by side with sacred scripture, that we can know the truth in all circumstances. So if maybe you or someone you know has ever struggled with maybe what you think is bad advice with regard to marriage and intimacy or whatever that might be, it's important that we are diving deeper to really make sure, well, if this doesn't sound right, is this what the church actually teaches? And so I want to encourage us, don't always just take the word, whether it be from me or from someone else, even on Relevant Radio. Go and read the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Take a course, dive deeper into your faith. It's so important that we know how to discern the truth of the faith, that we can think for ourselves so that we can fully subscribe to what the church itself has taught. Okay, I really want to talk about this in the last few minutes, and we're going to continue to discuss it here on Trending. I shared with you a couple weeks ago, as we kicked into the new year, all about the crisis we're facing surrounding women's sports and competition in women's sports. I have been astounded by the fact that one man pretending to be a woman has gotten away for some time now with beating women in his last season at the University of Pennsylvania in numerous meets for the swimming team there at University of Pennsylvania. Unfortunately, the governing body for the sport, the NCAA, as well as the university and other Ivy League schools, have insisted on having this be the norm, that if you have been on testosterone suppressing drugs for a year, that you as a man can claim to be a woman. Now, you do have to prove that you're taking testosterone suppressors. You can compete with other women. Now, This is what happened. A man by Will Thomas, who's going by Leah Thomas, has won countless races. In fact, he only lost one of the final meets just a couple weeks ago because another male, a man pretending to be a woman, beat him from Yale. And this whole story is absolutely astounding. But news has come out over this week that one of the NCAA facilitators, who is a champion of the transgender LGBTQ cause, he himself identifying as transgender, well, this person also has now come out saying that he's resigning from the NCAA because he's disappointed in their guidelines for who they allow to compete if they identify as transgender. Now, don't get me wrong, the NCAA is still allowing copious numbers of people who identify as women but who are actually men to play and beat out and unfairly steal the wins from women, steal scholarships, and steal the future for women in women's sports. But what's interesting is for this individual, it's not enough. In a certain respect, it's a reminder to me of the importance that we do need to stand firm in our convictions. This person thought that they weren't seeing enough done for transgender individuals, and we ourselves need to be willing to stand firm in our convictions. So that was one reminder. We're going to continue to cover this story. We've been covering it the last couple of weeks, but I want to remind us, first and foremost, that we cannot see the travesty of women's sports being destroyed by transgender politics. This is hurting women, it is anti-women, and it has to be rejected. Female athletes today are being silenced because they believe they will be called out as transphobic if they speak up. A few team members have spoken up, but anonymously. And so this is the reality. We have to be able to see the truth in the midst of the situation. And as one person recently commented to me, we have to see that it is laughable that here this obvious man in a woman's swimsuit is not a woman. And we ourselves can point to the truth we see and tell the truth in this instance and see that our faith continues to guide us and stand firmly on this truth. It's a gentleman's hour on Wednesday. This is Timmerie from Trending with Timmerie. We'll hear what men actually think about women. Are you alone on this? Do you have a question about women? Join me Wednesday for Gentleman's Hour at 6 p.m. Central on Relevant Radio or the Relevant Radio app.